we're in the thick of that fight 2 years ago when you talked to at the Bike Summit last. What are the lessons learned and what are the outcomes of that, without all the gory details? What are the lessons the city's learned and the bike communities learned from that fight over the bike lanes on Prospect Park West?
Well, I think that one of the lessons learned was pointed out by Secretary LaHood, who talked about how the people a lot of times are ahead of the papers and the editorial writers. And we certainly saw that with Prospect Park West, which was a bike lane, probably the world's most famous bike lane at this point, that was requested by the community that had an issue that they wanted to address about cycling safety and mobility. And as a result, working with the community and with the approval of all the local community board folk, we moved forward with it. And you know, a couple of local people didn't like it, which happens from time to time in New York. But in this case, there were some powerful interests that didn't like it, and so but the bottom line is that what we saw is that in poll after poll after poll, New Yorkers like their bike lanes. There were 7 polls taken between July 2011 and August 2012. All of them, by a majority, big support of bike lanes. 74% of bike share. I mean, really, the people are way ahead of the reporters on this. And so I think this bike lash was really dramatized because it's a great way to sell papers also. Some of you may have experienced this in your own communities. But it's working. I mean, the streets are safer. They're safer than they've been in 100 years. We've seen a doubling of people riding their bikes. And I talked about the economic development benefits. So, I mean, it's great for cities. You can sort of ignore them at your risk, I think. And I think there's a reason why our bike lanes are polling better than our mayoral candidates.
Bruce, I was a little troubled by your remarks. You suggested that the forces of demography and economy were making these changes, and that it wasn't us. How should we ride that wave? You say we're in the vanguard. What should we be doing over the next few years to really take advantage of that position in the vanguard?
Well, let me apologize first. Because obviously people here are doing some remarkable things. It's always helpful to do remarkable things when you're on a wave, right? I mean, so all I was basically trying to say is the future is with you. You just got here a little quicker than everyone else. And at the Brookings Institution, this is when you have to lower your voice. I mean, you really do want to understand the profound forces that are shaping any particular generation. And I think what we're experiencing in the United States, and we don't talk about this enough, frankly, but the Great Recession was our Great Depression, right? It was the first time we had had an economic downturn of this monumental sort of level. And once you have an effect like this, there is no going back. Right? It is a period of time where essentially you have to recalibrate and restructure. These things are happening. The bike movement, right? The rise of cities, the rise of density, the rediscovering of how density interplays with innovation, right? They're all happening at the same time. I think we'll look back at this period, frankly, and we'll think about it as a time when the United States went through a brutal period, because that's what it is for many, many people in this country, but came out of it stronger because we went back to fundamentals. So the big forces really do matter. If I was here 30 years ago talking about those household sizes were a lot bigger, and suburbanization and Science Park, the bike movement would be up against some big, big forces. But right now, you are riding a wave. And the key is how do you get to that 5%? Or how do we begin to sort of aspire to that kind of radical shift in the way we live our lives, the way we get from place to place. Because ultimately, if we do achieve that, I think that's reflective of and reinforcing of a very prosperous, very productive, very sustainable economy.
John. What are your dealers telling you about that? When people walk into their stores and what are they asking for? What's their expectation? What's their hope in their community? And what are they asking for in terms of the stuff that they want?
Well, I think you have, you talk about the things that are happening from the Brookings. Sure. And you're seeing these demographic shifts, and bike shops are seeing more people in the cities who want to ride their bikes in the cities, and not only that, but these people want safe places to ride. And that's the key, is how do you link up their love of cycling with their desire to have safe places to ride? Because you go back to what Secretary LaHood said, is if we really want to change America, we're going to need an army of advocates. I mean, 750 people in this room has proven it's gotten us a long way. But if we really want to change America, we're going to need a lot more. And if we can connect those people who are coming into the bike shops, who want to ride their bikes for transportation, to get to the sporting event, to go out to dinner, if we can get them to also ask their local leaders for those facilities, things will change very quickly.
And Janette, you've given cities through the NACTO guide the playbook to do that. How's that working? What are cities telling you that they want? How are they receiving it? It seems to us like kind of a game changer, that it's really given a lot of cities the permission to do the stuff that they just haven't been able to or felt they've been able to do for years.
Yes, well, you've been part of the process there. And we heard from a lot of cities that they had wanted to make some changes to their streets and incorporate and build out a cycling network, but that the national design guidance wasn't really there. That the MUTCD, that the AASHTO Green Book were not helpful in that. And we did discover that when you look at the national standards, I talked a little bit about this afternoon, we're dealing with national standards that were built, that came out 50 years ago. And standards from 50 years ago, that were used to build the interstate system are not great for metropolitan areas. And so we responded to that and came up with a very detailed guidebook so that everybody can understand exactly how to build out, bike lanes, protected lanes, how to deal with the engineering of it. And I think it's made a big difference, because a lot of cities don't have the wherewithal to go up against, some of the traditional engineers that may have been there for 50 years and that are used to doing things a certain way. And so having actually the toolkit to address some status quo thinking when we really need to adapt our streets, build them for the 21st century, giving them the playbook to actually get that done is important. And I might add that this playbook was endorsed by Secretary Ray LaHood. If you go to the NACTO website, you'll see a big picture of Ray LaHood with his face next to the NACTO guidebook that had nothing to do with our photo ops, but it was a nice outcome. And I think it's really important. We've got the second edition that's coming out. It's available. I encourage all of you that are interested in building out a strong network to take a look at it. But there's no going back. Communities are demanding this change. They want this change. Businesses are increasingly looking for this. And so, unless you really want to be left behind, I think that it's important that communities have that ability to incorporate this very, actually mainstream form of transportation into their streets.
I'm glad you didn't pick on any small Iowa towns this evening.
I'm sorry.
The most, this is, you're on home territory here, so everything's friendly, but the most difficult question I have for you, I get what you're saying about cities. What about the suburbs? What do we do about the suburbs to change the game in suburban America? Clearly, cities are getting it. Mayors of big cities are getting it, as you've described. But what about the suburbs? How do we change the thing there?
Frankly, I think in some respects, the bigger movement in the United States is not the recovery of cities, it's the urbanization of suburbs. I mean, if we took Metro out today to Bethesda or to Arlington or out to Silver Spring, Maryland, you would see urban style density, at least for the United States, in these places, right? And look, the bulk of our country lives in suburbs. The bulk of our employment is in suburbs. And that's why I brought up Research Triangle. Because when Research Triangle basically decides that it's going to urbanize, it has basically sent an enormous signal, essentially, to all of suburban America. I'm talking business now, that this is what it's going to take to compete for talented workers in this century. And the reason they did that was because what they began to see were firms going into downtown Durham and downtown Raleigh and downtown Chapel Hill, and they began to say to themselves, you know, we had a great model, a good run from 1950 to 2010, but if you're thinking 2010 to 2050, 2060, we better get with it. So I think what we're describing is really for metropolitan America, not just for urban America. And it will require, because we've sprawled out so far and we've decentralized so much, it's going to require some dramatic change in the American landscape. But it's already happening. The market and the consumers are demanding that. And, you know, the people in this room are doing the political work necessary to remake your streets and remake your places.
Janette, you see that process underway in New York and the more suburban boroughs and outside of Brooklyn and
she doesn't leave the city. I mean, it's like she can't breathe or something.
Yeah, it's just like those cyclists that are contributing to pollution. What is that about, really? Anyway, yes.
John, any thoughts on the suburbs? You don't have to.
I think if you win in the cities, you will win in the suburbs. And I think it was at the bike summit a few years ago. The mayor of Louisville was here, and he talked about all the things that are happening in Louisville, and everyone was kind of shocked, like, really? And when he got to the root cause of why he was so excited about cycling, is he had been to Colorado and he had seen what had happened in Boulder, and he had seen a lot of bike facilities, and he thought, I'm going to take that back to Louisville. And when people see bike sharing in downtown DC, and then they go out to Bethesda, or if they go to Chattanooga, or if they go to, you know, wherever they're going, Kansas City, it spreads. And if you win in the cities, I think you'll win in the suburbs.
I was actually handed a letter from the current new mayor of Louisville, not so new, today. They're back in the game. They want to get back to that position that they had when everyone was talking about them at the bike summit 5-6 years ago. Louisville, where are you? I know you're here. There you go.
And apparently, Kentucky is also me.
In front of you, for each of you, there's a book about Thomas Jefferson called The Art of Power, which I hope you will read and think of the bike summit every time you open the pages. What's our, for us, what's the art of our power? What's our strongest arrow in the quiver, as you mentioned, Janette? What's your final message for us, for this audience, to ride the wave, to have the most impact in the next couple of days in Washington, D.C., but then beyond that, as we go back to our communities and into the years ahead?
The art of power. You know, everybody in this room has made, you know, the transformation in their cities happen. And so you have incredible power. And, you know, we've been able to do what we've been able to do in New York City because of the kind of advocacy that comes from people like you in this room. I think that, though, it's important, you know, we all try to make the strongest possible case for cycling. And I think there's a strong case to be made on the safety side. And we've talked about the safety in numbers idea. You know, the more people that are cycling, the safer your streets are. And I think that's been very important. And I think the health case is very important. And climate change is very important. But I also think that you know, when we've gone through the issues that we've dealt with in New York City, the business case for cycling, I think, is an extraordinarily important one. And we've been able to show it on the macro level in the sense that, you know, people and companies can move anywhere today. And they're moving in places that have a lot of options for how you get around. And cycling is an incredibly attractive option, and people want to be around a city where they can pick up a bike and go. And so that's at the micro level, so you've got this, you know, national competition, global competition between cities. And I think that's important. But as important now, we're actually able to show what happens at the local level. So what happens on a street that has a protected bike lane on it? What's happening in terms of commercial vacancies? What happens in terms of retail sales? And so, again, continuing to make that case, it's about health, it's about the future of the planet, it's about safety, but it's also good business sense. And I think that's an important way for us to continue to make that case going forward.
John?
I think the two things would be to really deal with reality as to where we are as a nation. We've made a lot of progress in 13 years. We have a long way to go. Even you go to our best cities, we got a long way to go. So I think not being satisfied with where we're at. And the second thing, which I think is really important, is everybody has a multiplier effect. Is if you take a look at our own family here, and let's say in the United States there's 4,500 or 5,000 bicycle retailers. If you really ask the leading advocates in the country, how many of those retailers are really involved? The answer would be 300. There's 4,200 people in the business who really aren't engaged. And then if you take a look at suppliers and you say, how many suppliers are there? And we'll take a number, and let's say there's 100, there's 20 who are really engaged, really out there working it. And to me, we've got to engage the industry, we've got to engage retailers, and for the 750 people who are here, get your friends involved, because it's a great cause, and this is a way that everybody here can leave a legacy.
Bruce, I love the fact that you went straight to the index. To look at
No, I'm not a big, I have to say, I'm not a big fan of Thomas Jefferson. That's okay. This is terrible to say, but I'm a huge fan of Alexander Hamilton. And because if this guy was in charge, we'd all still be living in somewhere other. But in any event, he said some really nasty things about cities, and I thought I'd find the quote and read it, but it's terrible. He must have been talking about Friends. But in any event, this is an odd thing I'm going to say when you're all in Washington, D.C., but I think everyone here will understand it. I mean, no one in this room, particularly from the biking movement and what you've achieved, is waiting for the regs from Washington, D.C., right? I mean, I think what you have invented is a new circuitry of innovation in the United States. You prove it in one place, and it spreads virally across the country. And Washington, D.C. really now has to be in service of that, right? I mean, they didn't start the movement. They've been basically instructing for quite some time. And we're now in a period, as Earl knows, of essentially drift and dysfunction that is really quite remarkable in the history of our republic. So my message to you is, have a good time in Washington, D.C., spend money, it's good for the economy. But go home and make change, because that's where change happens, circa 2015.
I want to thank all three of you for participating, for joining us this evening, and for helping make the Bike Summit 2013 a great event. We're looking forward to all the activities tomorrow. We've got a full program, a busy day. Starts at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, breakfast beforehand. The mayor is speaking, Congressman Blumenauer is speaking. We've got a great lineup for you. There's an alliance party at the RFD, which is not even a block from the entrance to the hotel, I believe. So go over and find out who the leading advocates in the country are, and have a great time. And we'll see you back here bright and early tomorrow morning. Thank you all again.